The first sting came with a smile. "You will be fine, Dad. We have plans," my daughter said, and she kissed my forehead as if I were a child who would not notice a locked door. My son-in-law checked his watch and told the nurse to hurry because they had a flight to catch. My wife lifted her handbag and told me the trip was paid for. The rooms had ocean views, and sun would be good for her nerves. The word nerves cut through the beeping machines and hung over my bed like a wet sheet. I lay there with a heavy tongue and a left hand that would not answer, and I understood that I had become luggage they did not want to claim. My name is Thaddeus Merritt, and I am 68 years old. Born in Dayton, Ohio, raised on cracked pavement and summer corn, taught by a father who could repair a tractor with a shoelace and a prayer. I built a small carpentry shop that turned into a contractor's business that put roofs on half this town. I married Marilyn when we were both 22, fierce and sure and poor. We had a daughter named Aloan and a son named Asa. I taught them to ride bikes on a cul-de-sac that still bears the faint chalk of our hopscotch lines. I kept my promises like ledger entries and tried to be a man who came home. The stroke arrived on a Sunday morning like a thief through the back door. Bacon hissed, the radio murmured about rain, and my coffee went cold as the floor tilted under my shoes. My mouth sagged and the mug shattered. Marilyn stood over me with a look that I had not seen since our second year when the rent was late and our anger was young. In the ambulance, she held my phone and answered text messages. She did not hold my hand. Aloan met us at the hospital with a neat list of questions for the admitting nurse. Her husband, Breck, ran through the numbers on the deductible as if they were football scores. The lights above me were a string of moons with burnt edges. The doctor spoke slowly, and I understood enough. A blood clot, speech affected, weakness on the left, risk of a second event. He asked about my history, my work, my home, the stairs, the bathrooms, the handrails. He talked to Marilyn about support at home, about physical therapy, about follow-up scans. She nodded at the right times and then asked him if travel would be harmful. He said rest would be better. She smiled, said the trip was paid for, and that the ocean did wonders for a person. Breck grinned and told me to enjoy the hospital food. The nurse adjusted my pillow and said my children would be back soon. My tongue refused to form the words that sat like stones in my chest. Visitors came, brought balloons, and took photographs with half-formed captions. The church sent a small basket with grapes and lemon biscuits. A neighbor left a card with a short verse about mountains moving. Asa phoned in and spoke as if he were standing at the end of a long tunnel. He had a shift he could not trade and would try to come by in a few days. His voice used to crack with laughter in our pickup as we drove to watch high school games under cheap lights. That memory pressed against the inside of my skull. The day's light thinned to a gray ribbon, and the whisper of the curtain by the door sounded like rain against the roof of the shop I built when my hands were strong. When the room emptied, the quiet carried my thoughts to a place I had avoided. My father's will was a single sheet of paper that left his toolbox to me, a note on the back that said I would know what to do with the rest. I remembered my own will, drawn up on a spring afternoon, the ink still bright in my mind. Everything was set to pass on to Marilyn, then to the children in clean shares. The shop, the small rental house on Vine Street, the savings that were born of long days and cracked knuckles. A plan that once felt like love now felt like a rope around my ribs. The monitor beeped, and I counted the sounds as if they were steps on a stair. A nurse named Jocelyn had a voice made of wool. She moved my arm, taught me to lift my knee, asked about pain as if she were asking about the weather. She told me that people do cruel things when they are afraid. She said that fear turns into lists and lectures and flights to warm places. I nodded and watched the hall. Aloan sent a message with a photograph of a palm tree at the airport. Asa texted a thumbs up and a small heart. Marilyn wrote a sentence about checking in when they landed. The words pressed into my chest. I thought about birthdays I had not missed, broken bones I had paid for, instruments I had bought, and the small backyard stage I had built for Aloan's shy guitar recital. Memory can be a furnace. A man in the next bed snored and muttered about a dog named Bishop. The night nurse dimmed the lights and told me to sleep. The ceiling offered no comfort. I looked at my phone and searched for a number I had not dialed in years. The name glowed like a lighthouse, steady and plain. Notaries deal in paper and seals, but some of them also deal in quiet storms. Mrs. Keene had closed on half the houses in our zip code. She had watched marriages bloom and rot, watched children inherit cabins and sell them, watched brothers drag each other through court over a shed with a broken roof. She had a memory like a ledger and eyes that could find the weak step on a porch in a second. A text arrived from Marilyn with a photograph of a hotel lobby covered in white tile and orchids. The caption was 3 words that sounded like a toast. The nurse brought water and adjusted the rail on my bed. My jaw ached from the effort of forming simple sounds. I called Mrs. Keene and waited. Her voice was the same, a dry leaf turning in a soft wind. She asked how I was, and I told her that my left hand felt like someone else's glove. She asked if I was thinking clearly. I told her I was thinking the clearest thoughts of my life. She said she could come by in the morning with a witness if I wished. My heart felt like a drum in a parade that had suddenly stopped. I thought of the house that Marilyn wanted to remodel yet again. I thought of the safe deposit box at the bank and the letter my father had left in it that I never showed anyone. I thought of the rental property that Asa had promised to paint but never did, the one I painted myself under a sun that made the ladder too hot to touch. I thought of the shop where the smell of cedar still sits in the rafters. A man belongs to his work and his promises. A man also belongs to his choices. The monitors hummed. The air tasted of antiseptic and aluminium. I felt a heat in my chest that had nothing to do with fever. My fingers found a slow strength and curled like they remembered a nail and a hammer. Jocelyn came back with a clipboard and checked my numbers. She asked if I needed anything. I told her I needed a pen that did not skip. She smiled as if she knew something about storms and handed me a black pen and a plastic cup beneath which I could hold the paper steady. I practiced my name on a paper towel. The letters were crooked but legible. My father used to say that a crooked line still points the way. I asked Jocelyn if she could let a Mrs. Keene in the following morning. She nodded. She told me that a man who makes a plan sleeps better. I closed my eyes and listened to the wheels of a cart in the corridor roll away into the dark. The phone vibrated on the tray table. A new message from Aloan said they had landed. A photograph showed the children with coral necklaces and smiles as wide as summer. I touched the screen and felt nothing but glass. The old part of me wanted to reply with kindness. The new part of me wanted silence to do the work. The morning would bring paper and witnesses and a notary who had seen more than she said. There are moments in a life when a person chooses who they will be, even if half the body has forgotten how to obey. My name, once steady, now looked like a shoreline after a storm. It still belonged to me. The phone lit again in the dark. I pressed the call button and listened to the ring. When the voice answered, I spoke slowly, each word careful and whole. Mrs. Keene, I said, tomorrow I need to change everything. Morning light slid across the hospital curtain like a blade. Machines whispered, nurses traded shifts, and the scent of disinfectant mixed with stale coffee. Thaddeus Merritt blinked at the window where pale clouds floated past, soft and careless. His tongue felt heavy, his hand clumsy, but his thoughts were clean. A man could lose the use of half his body and still hold on to clarity. The door opened, and Jocelyn entered with a smile that carried the quiet steadiness of a woman used to watching storms pass. She checked the monitors, wrote a few numbers, and whispered that a visitor was waiting outside. Mrs. Keene stepped in with a briefcase and a small thermos. Her gray hair was coiled neatly, her spectacles rested low on her nose, and her eyes carried that mix of patience and judgment that only long years in business could grant. Mr. Merritt, she said, you do look better than I feared. He tried to answer, and though his words slurred, the intent was sharp. She poured coffee into a paper cup and placed it beside him. The hospital air seemed to shift as she set the briefcase on the bed tray. I have your file, she said. The last will from 12 years ago, the property papers, and the business registration for Merritt Construction. He nodded, watching her gloved fingers sort the documents. You want to make amendments? She asked. He formed the words slowly, telling her about Marilyn's trip, about the silence from Asa, about the distance that had grown between him and Aloan. Each sentence came out like a plank nailed into place. She listened without flinching. When he finished, she said, you are not the first man to be left in a hospital room with a heart full of plans and a family on vacation. She took out a single blank sheet and placed it before him. Tell me what you want done, she said. He looked at the paper as though it were a mirror. His breath came steady, and he remembered the smell of sawdust in his workshop, the weight of a hammer, the sound of nails being driven straight and sure. He wanted his legacy to be the same, no loose ends. His voice was soft, but sure as he said that the business should be left to someone who would build rather than sell. The rental house should go to a man who had helped him restore it 20 years ago, a widower named Clay who worked quietly and never asked for more. The savings would be placed in a trust for the grandchildren, not through the hands that had chosen beaches over bedsides. Mrs. Keene wrote every word carefully. "And your home?" she asked. His eyes rested on the wall clock, its hands steady and cold. "It goes to me," he said, "until I no longer need it. After that, it becomes a place where men like me can heal. Not a nursing home, a place where they can fix things, make things, and feel useful again." Her pen paused, then moved again, leaving trails of ink that seemed to hum with promise. When she finished, she placed the pen in his hand. His fingers trembled, but he managed to sign. The letters staggered but still stood tall. Mrs. Keene sealed the document and handed him a copy. "It is legal," she said softly. "And fair." He nodded, his throat thick with something heavier than gratitude. "They will not understand," she added. He smiled faintly. "They will," he said. "Just not today." Jocelyn returned to check the 4-line, humming a gospel tune under her breath. The nurse looked at Mrs. Keene's briefcase, then at Thaddeus, and something in her gaze said she understood enough not to ask. Mrs. Keene closed her case, promised to file the changes by afternoon, and gave him a small envelope. "It holds a letter," she said, "for whoever you wish to read it when the time comes." After she left, the room felt both lighter and heavier. The machines hummed, the sunlight sharpened, and Thaddeus thought about how easily love turns into habit, and habit into entitlement. He remembered how Marilyn used to bring him lunch at the site, a sandwich wrapped in foil, her laughter bouncing off the timber frames. Somewhere between those days and this hospital bed, the warmth had thinned into something like politeness. He drifted into sleep and dreamed of the shop. The walls glowed with the dust of cedar and oak, and his younger self moved easily, steady hands guiding each cut. His father stood in the corner, the same patient smile on his face, nodding as if to say that it was time to build again, just differently this time. When he woke, evening light had returned. His phone blinked with a new message from Marilyn. "The sea is perfect. We're thinking of extending the stay by a week." Beneath it, a photo of her in a wide hat, Eloan sipping from a glass, Asa laughing with the children. Thaddeus stared at the screen until the image blurred. He placed the phone face down and whispered to himself, "Enjoy it while you can." Then he looked toward the door, where the corridor stretched long and quiet. The future had already begun to shift, and none of them knew it yet. The nurse turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of the monitor. Thaddeus rested his hand on the sealed envelope beside his bed. The ink on the will was still drying. Tomorrow would start the first step of a plan that would change everything. And somewhere, thousands of miles away, the waves broke gently on the Maldives shore, unaware that a storm was gathering back home. Rain began to slide down the hospital window like fingers tracing an old scar. Thaddeus watched the drops merge and race downward, listening to the rhythm as if it were a language he once spoke fluently. The doctor said his progress was promising. His speech was returning, his grip stronger. He nodded politely, though his mind had already drifted to matters the doctor could not measure. Strength was no longer about muscle. It was about resolve. 2 weeks passed before the discharge papers came. Marilyn had not called since the last message about the sea. Eloan sent 2 photos, one of coral reefs and another of a sunset captioned, "You'd love this, Dad." Thaddeus looked at the colors and thought about the small bluebird wind chime he made for her 12th birthday, the one that used to hang outside her window. She had once said that every time it sang, she thought of home. Now, the wind chime was silent, rusting somewhere in the shed. Jocelyn helped him pack his few belongings into a paper bag, the clothes that still smelled faintly of disinfectant, a paperback novel he never finished, and the envelope Mrs. Keene had left. "You sure you'll be all right alone?" she asked. He smiled with the corner of his mouth that still obeyed him. "I've been alone before," he said. "I just didn't notice." The hospital arranged a taxi. The ride home was slow through the wet streets of Dayton. The driver spoke about gas prices, local sports, and how his nephew wanted to move to Florida. Thaddeus nodded in rhythm with the windshield wipers, his mind tracing through decades that felt both near and unreachable. The house appeared at the end of Maple Grove Road, standing tall and still, the porch light dim, the mailbox half open. The paint had begun to peel, a small reminder that even timber grows tired. Inside, the air was thick with quiet. The photos on the mantel looked back at him. Weddings, graduations, birthdays. He paused at one from 20 years ago. Marilyn in a yellow dress, Aloan holding a sparkler, Asa wearing a paper crown. He remembered how the laughter filled the yard that night, how the fireflies hovered like tiny stars. He placed the frame face down. That evening, he made tea in the chipped mug that said, "Best Dad 1993. His hand trembled only slightly as he stirred the spoon. The sound filled the empty kitchen like a metronome, keeping time with his thoughts. He sat at the table, unfolded Mrs. Keene's letter, and read the neat handwriting. It confirmed that the new will was filed, the trust set, the business reassigned. Everything was complete. At the bottom, she had written one final note. When they return, speak little. Let your silence do the explaining. He slept in the living room that night, the hum of the refrigerator keeping him company. Dreams visited in fragments. The scent of sawdust, Aloan's first steps, Marilyn's laughter in the back of the truck. Memory was kind only in short doses. When morning came, he rose slowly and began to tidy the house. He gathered the holiday brochures Marilyn had left on the counter, the receipts from boutique stores, the unopened mail. The stack grew until it looked like a small tower built from neglect. Later that afternoon, a knock came at the door. It was Clay, the widower who had helped him repair the rental house years before. His denim jacket was soaked, his face lined with concern. "Heard you were back," Clay said. "Didn't see anyone around." Thaddeus nodded and motioned him inside. They sat with mugs of coffee between them. Clay talked about his small garden, about how the tomatoes had come in early that year. Then, in a quieter voice, he said, "I heard they went on vacation." "That true?" Thaddeus's lips curved faintly. "True enough." Clay shook his head. "You're a better man than me, Tad. I'd have changed the locks." Thaddeus looked toward the window where the rain had stopped, leaving streaks like veins. "Sometimes," he said, "the locks don't need changing. People just stop using the key." Clay stayed for an hour, fixing a leaky pipe in the kitchen before leaving. The sound of running water, steady and sure, was oddly comforting. When Thaddeus stood, his legs trembled but held. He walked to the workshop behind the house, pushing open the door to a room that still smelled of cedar and linseed oil. Dust hung in the air like memory. He ran his fingers over the workbench, touching each scar, each groove carved by years of use. In the corner sat an unfinished rocking chair he had planned to give Marilyn on their 40th anniversary. He brushed the dust away and whispered, "I think you'll have to wait." Evening arrived quietly. The sky turned violet, the first stars blinking above the trees. He sat on the porch with a blanket and watched the streetlights flicker on. Children rode past on bicycles, their laughter echoing faintly down the road. It reminded him of the years when his own children would circle the driveway, calling for him to watch. He remembered always watching, even when they thought he wasn't. As the air cooled, he opened his phone. There were no new messages. He scrolled to a contact named Home Group, a thread filled with old family photos and brief updates. His thumb hovered over the screen. Then he typed, "Hope the ocean's still warm." He hit send, knowing the message would sit there unseen for hours, maybe days. He leaned back, eyes fixed on the darkening sky. Somewhere far away, the family he built was laughing beneath another kind of light. They would return soon, unaware of the new order written in ink and sealed by law. The man they left behind was not broken. He was rebuilding. The porch clock struck 9, the sound deep and certain. Thaddeus smiled faintly and whispered to the night, "Let's see what you think when you come home." The day they came back was bright and windless, the sort of day that made the street look freshly painted. Thaddeus sat in the armchair by the window, his cane resting beside him, a pot of coffee brewing quietly on the counter. The house smelled of pine cleaner and toast. He had spent the last few days moving through each room, steadying himself with care, setting things in order as though preparing for guests. He had always believed that a man's home should speak for him before he opened his mouth. The taxi arrived at noon. Laughter spilled out first, Aloan's clear voice, Ace's deep tone, the quick chatter of the grandchildren. Marilyn followed, wrapped in a white scarf, her skin bronzed and glowing from the sun. She carried her handbag as though it contained all the answers. Thaddeus did not rise when the door opened. He simply turned his head. The surprise on their faces was brief, quickly replaced by relief and a hint of awkwardness. "Dad, you look so much better," Aloan exclaimed, setting her bags down and rushing to his side. She kissed his cheek, the gesture light but rehearsed. "We were so worried." Thaddeus's eyes held steady on hers. "Worried enough to send a postcard?" he asked. The words were soft, almost kind, but they carried weight. A silence settled. Marilyn adjusted her scarf and smiled thinly. "You look strong," she said, avoiding the question. "We brought you something from the Maldives." From one of the bags, she pulled out a small carved turtle made of dark wood. "It's supposed to bring good luck," she said. Thaddeus turned it over in his hands. "Seems I've already had mine," he murmured. The children came forward to hug him, chattering about the ocean, the food, the dolphins. He listened, nodding at the right moments, his hand gently patting their backs. He had missed their laughter more than he wished to admit. After lunch, they unpacked in a flurry of suitcases and half-finished stories. Marilyn filled the kitchen with the sound of plates and questions. Was he eating well? Had anyone visited? Had he seen the doctor? Each query was a veil for guilt she refused to name. "I managed," he replied, again and again, until the air grew heavy with things unsaid. Later, when the children went out to play, Thaddeus sat with Marilyn on the porch. The autumn sun lay low, casting long shadows across the lawn. "You didn't have to come back early," he said. She glanced at him, caught off guard. "We didn't," she answered. "The flights were always booked for today." He smiled faintly. "Of course." He studied her profile. The same woman who once painted this porch with him, laughing when the brush left streaks on her nose. Now her face was careful, guarded. "I thought about you," she said after a pause. "Every day." He looked toward the horizon. "You thought about what might happen if I didn't recover." The words were not cruel, only factual. Marilyn's lips parted, then closed. She stood, muttered something about starting dinner, and walked inside. The door shut softly behind her. Evening drew in. The family gathered around the table, the conversation light but uncertain. Thaddeus ate slowly, listening to the sound of forks against plates, the background hum of a family pretending everything was fine. When dinner ended, Aloan cleared the dishes. Asa opened his phone under the table, hiding a glance at some notification. Marilyn poured wine for herself, none for him. "I spoke with Dr. Carter," Thaddeus said suddenly. "He says I can start working again soon. Small things, but enough to keep me steady." "That's wonderful," Aloan said. "Maybe take it easy for a while, though. No need to rush back to the shop." He looked at her, his eyes calm. "The shop's not mine anymore." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I signed it over," he said. "It belongs to someone who'll use it. Clay Henderson. You remember him. The man who helped me rebuild the rental house." The table went still. Marilyn set her glass down too hard, spilling a drop of wine. "You what?" she said. Thaddeus's voice remained even. "Clay helped me when I couldn't lift a board. He keeps things alive. I trust him with it." Aloan blinked. "Dad, that's a bit sudden, isn't it?" "The shop is part of the family." He corrected. The family seemed busy elsewhere. Marilyn's face paled. "You can't just give it away without talking to us." "I did talk," he said quietly. "You just weren't here to listen." Asa leaned back, crossing his arms. "So that's your revenge? Signing everything over because we went on a trip?" Thaddeus looked at him, eyes neither angry nor sad. "No, son. It isn't revenge. It's responsibility. I built things my whole life to last. People who abandon what's still standing don't deserve to inherit it." No one spoke. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. The children returned, asking about dessert, and the tension scattered like startled birds. Marilyn forced a smile and led them away. Thaddeus sat alone, listening to the faint laughter from the other room. He reached for the turtle figurine and placed it on the windowsill beside the fading light. It caught the sunset and glowed faintly, as if mocking him with its promise of good luck. He whispered to it, "Let's see whose luck runs out first." Upstairs, he heard voices, Marilyn's sharp, Aloan's pleading, Asa's low and tight. They spoke his name in half sentences, too quiet to follow, but easy to understand. Plans were forming, questions about legality, fairness, and money. He closed his eyes and leaned back in the chair. Mrs. Keene had told him there would be noise before quiet. She had been right. Outside, the first autumn wind brushed through the trees. Inside, A man who had once been broken sat still and unafraid, waiting for what would come next. The next morning arrived pale and cold. Thaddeus woke early, before the rest of the house stirred. He brewed coffee, the smell filling the kitchen with warmth that the silence could not match. The sunlight glinted off the turtle figurine on the windowsill, turning its polished shell into a shimmer of gold. It looked peaceful there, though he knew peace rarely lasted in this house anymore. He had just settled into his chair when footsteps came down the stairs. Marilyn appeared in her robe, hair loosely pinned, eyes already tired. She sat opposite him, folding her hands on the table. "We need to talk," she said. He nodded. "I thought we might." She inhaled sharply. "You blindsided us, Thaddeus. The business, the rental house. Clay Henderson? Really? You've known him for years, but that doesn't make him family." He sipped his coffee and studied her face. "Family isn't a word you inherit, Marilyn. It's one you prove." She looked away, the line of her mouth tightening. "You're punishing us. That's what this is. You're angry that we took a break, that we tried to live our lives." He set his cup down. "You left me in a hospital bed with one good hand and half a voice. You didn't call for 2 weeks. That isn't a break, it's abandonment." Her voice rose. "That's not fair. You've always made everything about duty, about sacrifice. I gave you 40 years, Thaddeus. 40 years of being the steady wife of a man who never took a holiday because he was afraid the world might fall apart if he wasn't there to hold it up." The words hung between them, sharp as broken glass. Thaddeus said nothing. He stared at the light moving across the table and remembered the way she used to laugh when they painted that very wall. There had been love once, but love had aged into obligation, and obligation into resentment. The sound of another door opening upstairs broke the silence. Eloan came down, her hair tied back, a crease between her brows. "Dad," she said, voice tight but gentle, "I've been trying to make sense of what you did. I called the notary's office. Mrs. Keene confirmed everything." He nodded. "Good woman. Good woman." Eloan's tone cracked. "She helped you give away our family's future. You've worked your whole life for us. Why throw it away now?" He met her gaze. "Because I realized I wasn't working for us. I was working for the idea of us, the version of family that only exists in photographs." Her face softened for a moment. "We made mistakes, Dad, but we thought you were going to be okay. You always were." "I was," he said quietly, "until I wasn't, and no one noticed." Eloan's shoulders slumped. She turned and left the room, the soft thud of her footsteps climbing the stairs echoing faintly. Marilyn poured herself another coffee, staring into it as though it might offer answers. Later that afternoon, Asa arrived. His truck rattled into the driveway, engine sputtering. He stepped inside without knocking, his expression dark. "We need to talk about that, Will," he said without greeting. Thaddeus nodded. "Go ahead. You can't just rewrite everything because you're upset. Eloan and I have kids. You can't leave them with nothing." "They have everything that matters," Thaddeus said. "They have each other. They have time. They can build their own." "That's not how it works," Asa snapped. "You don't just erase your family." Thaddeus leaned forward. "No, Asa. You erased me first." The words landed like stones. Asa's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. "You're losing it," he muttered. "The stroke messed with your head." Thaddeus's voice stayed calm. It cleared it. Marilyn rose then, trying to play peacekeeper. "Stop this, both of you. We can fix it, Tad. We'll talk to Mrs. Keene. Maybe there's still time." He stood slowly, gripping the table for balance. "There isn't. The papers are sealed. What's done is done." Asa stared at him, eyes cold. "Then don't expect any of us around when you need help again." Thaddeus looked at his son and saw not the boy who once ran into his arms, but a man who measured love by inheritance. "I don't," he said. Asa turned and walked out, the door slamming behind him hard enough to shake the window glass. The house fell silent again. Marilyn sat down, her hands trembling. "You've torn this family apart." He looked at her with quiet sadness. "No, I just stopped pretending it was whole." That night, he sat alone in the workshop. The single bulb above the bench cast a cone of yellow light over the sawdust and half-finished chair. He ran his palm along the wood, the smoothness cool under his fingers. In that moment, he realized he no longer felt anger, only release. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, the one Mrs. Keene had given him for notes. Inside, he began to write a letter. Not an apology, Not an explanation, just truth. He wrote about choices and silence, about what love should mean when spoken through action rather than words. When he finished, he closed the notebook and set it on the chair. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the leaves. He listened for a long time, then whispered to the empty room. They'll understand one day. Upstairs, a light flickered in Alohan's window. Inside, his daughter sat on her bed, scrolling through old photos on her phone. One showed her father holding her as a toddler, his hands steady and sure. She stared at it until her vision blurred. Downstairs, Thaddeus sat with the quiet certainty that something had shifted. The storm had begun to pass, but what it left behind would change them all. Morning came with a frost so thin it looked like breath frozen on the world's surface. The Merritt house, once filled with laughter and noise, now felt like a museum of echoes. Thaddeus woke before dawn as usual, the habit of early rising too deeply carved into him to fade. He dressed slowly, every movement deliberate, his left hand still stubborn but improving. The kettle began its soft whistle, and he watched it steam, thinking that even a wounded man could still start his day with order. He opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The air cut through his lungs, sharp and alive. Across the yard, the workshop stood waiting, his sanctuary, his last honest space. Inside, sawdust glimmered in the faint light, the air still scented with cedar and varnish. He sat at the workbench and traced the outline of the unfinished rocking chair. It was meant to be a gift once, a token of 40 years of marriage, built with the same hands that had carried groceries, held children, and steadied tools. He looked at the smooth curve of the armrest and wondered whether Marilyn even remembered mentioning she wanted one. The door creaked open behind him. "You're up early," came a voice. Alohan stepped into the workshop, her hair tied back, wearing the sweatshirt she used to borrow from him as a teenager. She looked around at the tools, the shavings, the neat shelves. "I forgot how much this place smells like home," she said softly. Thaddeus smiled faintly. "It still is, if you want it to be." She hesitated before replying. "Dad, I didn't come to fight. I just needed to understand." He put down the sandpaper, then asked. Alohan took a deep breath. "You've always been the one who fixed things. Every broken chair, every leak, every mess we made. You handled it. You never asked for help, not once. So when you got sick, I thought maybe you didn't want help. I thought giving you space was what you needed." Thaddeus's eyes softened. "Space is not the same as absence, Alohan. When I was lying in that hospital bed, every hour felt like a reminder of how alone a man can be, even surrounded by people he loves." She lowered her gaze. "I didn't mean to make you feel that way." "I know you didn't," he said gently. "But meaning doesn't change the feeling." They stood in silence for a moment. Sunlight slipped through the cracks in the blinds, catching the dust in golden lines. Alohan walked over to the workbench, running her fingers along the half-carved seat. "You were making this for Mum, weren't you?" He nodded. "Started before the stroke. I couldn't finish it then." "She'd like it," Alohan said. He looked at her, the corners of his eyes tightening. "She used to like a lot of things." Alohan smiled sadly. "She still does. She's just scared. Scared you'll never forgive her." Thaddeus leaned back, letting her words hang. "Forgiveness isn't something you can demand. It's something earned quietly, like trust." Alohan nodded slowly. Then she said, "You should know, Mum's been talking about leaving for a while. Even before the trip. She thought maybe after you recovered, you'd both go separate ways. She didn't say it outright, but I heard enough." Thaddeus absorbed that without flinching. "Then maybe she'll get what she wanted." Alohan's voice cracked. "Don't say that, Dad." He reached across the workbench and took her hand, rough palm to soft skin. "Some things end because they're meant to. Doesn't mean they weren't good once." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. "You always find a way to make even sadness sound wise." "Age gives you practice," he said, smiling faintly. She squeezed his hand. "Just don't shut us out completely. Even if we failed you, we still love you." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Love isn't gone, Alohan. It's just quieter now." After she left, he sat alone in the workshop for a long time, the quiet pressing against his ribs. The rocking chair waited beside him, patient, unfinished. He picked up the chisel and began to work again, slow and steady. Each stroke of the blade was like an exhale, shaving away anger, shaping something truer. Marilyn spent most of that morning pacing through the house. She could not bear the stillness. The walls seemed to listen, and the photographs on the mantel appeared to judge her. She opened the curtains, closed them again, turned on the television, and turned it off. The noise in her mind refused to quiet. Her phone buzzed, a message from Asa. Talk to a lawyer. We might be able to contest it if Dad's health can be questioned. Get his medical file. She stared at the words, then deleted the message. Something in her recoiled. Thaddeus might have changed the will, but he was still the man who had carried her through every winter and built her every home. Fighting him in court felt like scraping her own heart raw. Instead, she walked to his study. The air there smelled faintly of tobacco and old paper. On the desk sat the small leather notebook he always kept. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were neat lines of handwriting. Dates, thoughts, small notes. When love turns into pity, both people lose. I keep waiting for her to look at me like she used to. The silence in this house is louder than any argument. Marilyn closed the book quickly, pressing it to her chest. Guilt surged through her like cold water. She had been selfish, chasing comfort because she feared confronting age and fragility. Thaddeus had given her constancy, and she had mistaken it for confinement. She sat at his desk, head bowed, when she noticed the small drawer slightly ajar. Inside was an envelope with her name written in his shaky handwriting. Her breath caught. She opened it carefully, the paper trembling between her fingers. Marilyn, if you're reading this, it means I'm still here, but not the same man you remember. The truth is, I loved you even when I didn't like you. I loved the woman who used to paint in the kitchen, who danced with our children to songs she didn't know the words to. Somewhere along the way, we both got tired of the noise, tired of trying. I forgave you long before I knew I needed to. You don't owe me anything anymore, not even apology. But if you ever wonder whether I stopped caring, look at the chair in the workshop. Every cut of wood in it is a promise I never broke. Thaddeus. Her tears came silently, falling onto the letter, darkening the ink. She pressed her palm to the words as if she could feel the warmth of his hand through them. When she finally stood, her knees felt weak. She walked outside, following the faint hum of the workshop saw. Through the window she saw him, bent slightly, carving the final curve into the chair's armrest. His movements were slow but steady, the rhythm of a man who had nothing left to prove. She watched him for a long time before stepping inside. He looked up when she entered, but did not stop working. I was wondering when you'd find it, he said quietly. Her voice broke. Why didn't you just tell me? Would you have listened? She hesitated. Maybe not then, but I would now. He wiped the sawdust from his hands and turned to face her. It's too late for the old version of us, but maybe not too late for kindness. She nodded, tears still streaking her cheeks. Can I sit? He gestured to a stool. She sat and watched him work, the scrape of the chisel soothing and rhythmic. You always made things look easy, she said. It never was, he replied. But it was worth it. They sat together in quiet understanding. It was not reconciliation, not yet, but it was something close to peace. By evening, the house felt lighter. Aloan made soup, the children laughed in the living room, and Marilyn set the table without being asked. When Thaddeus came in, his shirt flecked with sawdust, the air seemed to hold its breath. She handed him a bowl of soup, their hands brushing briefly. The touch carried apology and acceptance all at once. Dinner was filled with small laughter and cautious conversation. Asa remained distant, answering questions with nods and short replies, but he stayed. Thaddeus watched his family move around him, imperfect, fractured, but here. He realized that sometimes winning didn't mean triumph. It meant survival with dignity intact. After dinner, Aloan cleared the dishes and the children went upstairs. Marilyn lingered by the doorway. You finished it, she said. Thaddeus nodded. It's in the workshop. She hesitated. Can I see it? He led her out to the porch where the rocking chair sat beneath the lamplight. The wood glowed warm and smooth, the grain like ripples frozen in motion. She touched the armrest, her fingers tracing the curve. It's beautiful, she whispered. He smiled faintly. It's yours, even if we aren't. She looked up at him, her eyes wet but steady. Maybe that's enough. He didn't answer. The night air carried the faint sound of wine through the trees, and somewhere in that stillness, understanding settled between them like an old song remembered. When he went to bed later, the house was quiet. He paused by his bedside table, where Mrs. Keene's letter still rested. He thought of what she had said. Let your silence do the explaining. It had. His silence had spoken louder than any argument ever could. He turned off the light and lay back, the hum of the world outside fading into calm. For the first time in years, he felt a peace that did not depend on anyone else's choices. He had built something lasting, not just with his hands, but with his will. And downstairs, in the glow of the porch lamp, the rocking chair moved gently in the wind, creaking in time with the steady rhythm of a heart that had learned to forgive without forgetting. The next few days drifted by with an odd calm that both soothed and unsettled the house. Thaddeus moved through his routines quietly, drinking coffee on the porch at sunrise, mending small things, an old hinge on the door, a loose tile in the kitchen, the broken leg of a chair. The work steadied him, gave him rhythm. Marilyn kept her distance, but no longer carried tension like armor. Aloan visited often, helping where she could, her presence soft as morning light. Only Asa remained absent, though his truck was sometimes seen parked a few blocks away. Thaddeus suspected his son came by to watch, torn between pride and guilt. He waited, knowing that when a man's conscience begins to burn, he either hides or finally comes home. On the fourth evening, as dusk painted the sky with slow bruises of violet, Thaddeus heard the gravel crunch outside. He looked through the window and saw Asa standing by the mailbox, his hands deep in his pockets. After a long minute, the younger man started toward the porch. Thaddeus opened the door before he could knock. "You came," he said simply. Asa nodded, his expression guarded. "Didn't feel right staying angry." "That's a start," Thaddeus replied. "Coffee?" "Sure." Inside, the air was warm with the smell of baked bread and sawdust. They sat at the table where so many arguments had begun and ended. Asa looked older than his 38 years, his face drawn by worry, his shoulders heavy with something unspoken. "You were right," he said finally. "About me. About what we turned into." Thaddeus stayed silent, letting him speak. "I kept thinking about that day at the hospital," Asa continued. "I told myself you'd be fine, because you always were. You were the one who fixed everything, who made things work. I guess I thought you didn't need us. It's easier to believe that than admit I didn't want to see how bad things were." Thaddeus nodded slowly. "We believe what comforts us most." Asa sighed. "I talked to Mom. She said you left us the money for the kids, but not for us. I was angry. Still am, a little. But then I remembered how many times you bailed me out. College loans, that first truck, the down payment on our house. You gave me everything I asked for, and somehow I still acted like I was owed more." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You didn't need to give me the shop. I never cared about it the way you did. Clay probably deserves it more. I just wish you'd told me. I wish I'd been man enough to understand before it got this far." Thaddeus looked at his son with a quiet pride that softened the lines around his mouth. "It takes more strength to face your own failings than to deny them. You're doing that now." Asa laughed under his breath. "Guess the merit stubbornness didn't skip a generation." "Seems not." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sound of the ticking clock filling the room. Then Asa said, "I want to help with the workshop. If you'll let me. Maybe learn the trade properly this time." Thaddeus's heart stirred. It's never too late to build something worth keeping. Asa smiled faintly. "You really think so?" "I know so." When Asa left that night, there was no handshake, no grand apology, just a simple, quiet understanding between father and son. Thaddeus stood at the window long after the truck disappeared down the street, watching the night settle over the town. He felt the faint pulse of something that had been missing for years: hope. The following morning, Aloan arrived early with breakfast and a look of cautious optimism. "Asa texted," she said. "He said things went well." Thaddeus smiled. "He's trying. That's more than enough." Aloan placed a box on the table. "I brought some of Mum's old photo albums. Thought we could go through them. Might be good to remember when things were simple." They spent hours flipping through pages: their first house, Marilyn's bright smile, Aloan's messy pigtails, Asa's missing front teeth. Each photograph was a relic, frozen proof that once there had been laughter loud enough to fill every room. Thaddeus caught himself smiling at memories he had thought were buried too deep. In one photo, taken decades earlier, he stood on the roof of the first home he ever built, holding little Asa on his shoulders while Marilyn waved from below. "You see that?" he said. "That was the day the inspector said the frame was the straightest he'd seen in 20 years. Aloan laughed. "You must have been insufferable." "Proud," he corrected. There's a difference. Marilyn entered quietly, drawn by the sound of their laughter. For a moment, she stood at the doorway, unsure whether to join. Thaddeus gestured to her. "We saved you a seat." She sat beside him, her hands resting lightly on her lap. "I remember that day," she said softly, looking at the same photograph. "You wouldn't come down until I promised to make you pecan pie." He chuckled. "I must have eaten half of it myself." Her smile lingered a moment longer than it might have weeks ago. "You deserved it." The warmth of nostalgia filled the room. For a while, they were just a family again, imperfect, scarred, but tethered by shared memory. That evening, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Keene. Her voice carried its usual measured calm. "Mr. Merritt, I wanted to inform you that all documents have cleared. The trust is established, and your final instructions are in effect. If you wish to make any small adjustments, now would be the time." Thaddeus thought for a long moment before answering. "Leave it as is. Though, I might add a note for the children. Something to remind them that legacy isn't about property." Mrs. Keene smiled through the line. "You always did have a way with words, Mr. Merritt." After the call ended, he sat for a while, the house quiet except for the distant sound of the wind outside. Then he took out his notebook again. On a fresh page, he began to write. "What you build with your hands fades. What you build with your choices lasts." He tore the page out and placed it inside the same envelope where his letter to Marilyn had been. This one, he labeled simply, "For my children." That night, as he prepared for bed, Marilyn approached the doorway. "You're writing again," she said. He nodded. "Old habits." She hesitated. "You're calmer now. Different." "So are you," he said. She looked at him, then away. "I don't know what comes next. For us, I mean. Maybe we stop trying to fix what's broken," he said, "and start building something new from the pieces that still fit." She gave a small nod. "I'd like that." As she turned to leave, he added quietly, "Thank you for finding the letter." Marilyn paused, her voice low. "It found me when I needed it most." When she left, Thaddeus lay awake for a long time, listening to the soft creaks of the old house. They no longer sounded lonely, just alive. Days grew into weeks, and the chill of early winter crept through the town. Merritt's workshop began to hum again, this time with 2 pairs of hands at work. Asa came every evening after his shift, learning to measure, plane, and cut with care. The rhythm of their work echoed through the yard, a quiet duet of reconciliation. Eloan stopped by often with the grandchildren, who played in the sawdust and marveled at the smell of wood. Marilyn would bring hot tea and linger at the door, her laughter returning in small, cautious bursts. The community noticed the change. The once quiet house now glowed with life again. Even Clay, the man to whom the business had passed, came by regularly, offering help and friendship. "You gave me a gift, Tad," he said one evening. "But I think you were the one who needed a reason to keep building." Thaddeus smiled. "Maybe we both did." On the first snow of December, the Merritt family gathered for supper. The house was warm, the smell of roast chicken filling the air. After the meal, Thaddeus stood and cleared his throat. "There's something I want to read to you all," he said, pulling the folded note from his pocket. Eloan hushed the children, and Asa leaned forward. Marilyn looked up from the table, her eyes steady on him. He began, voice quiet but sure. "I once thought that family was something a man built with his hands. That if he worked hard enough, provided enough, and stayed true enough, the people he loved would never drift. But I was wrong. Family isn't a structure. It's a promise, one you have to keep remaking even when it breaks. I don't regret the choices I've made. They were the only way I knew to protect what was left of me. But I hope you understand that what I gave away was never yours to lose. It was mine to release. If love has any purpose at all, it's to teach us how to let go without turning bitter." He folded the paper and looked around the table. No one spoke for a long while. Then Asa said, quietly, "I think we're finally starting to understand, Dad." Eloan reached across and took her father's hand. "We lost our way, but you led us back." Marilyn nodded, tears in her eyes. "You always did." Thaddeus looked at them all, the soft glow of lamplight wrapping the room in gold. "Then maybe," he said, "we can start again." Outside, snow continued to fall in slow, deliberate flakes, covering the ground in quiet forgiveness. Inside, a family sat together not out of obligation, but out of choice. And in the corner of the porch, the wooden rocking chair moved gently, creaking to the rhythm of peace rediscovered. Its sound not of endings, but of beginnings built on love finally understood. Winter settled in fully, the kind that blanketed the town in silver stillness. Maple Grove Road gleamed under streetlights, lined with rooftops breathing out slow curls of smoke. Inside the Merritt home, warmth returned not as laughter spilling from every corner, but as gentleness. A quiet rhythm of shared mornings, unspoken forgiveness, and small acts that mattered more than grand gestures. Thaddeus had regained much of his strength. His gait was still slow, his left hand still clumsy, yet his will had become firmer than at any time before. The stroke had taken a part of him, but in its wake, it had carved out something purer, an understanding of what truly remained once pride, property, and resentment had burned away. Most days began the same way. He brewed his coffee, opened the back door, and stood beneath the gray sky, watching the breath of the morning rise from the trees. The rocking chair sat near the porch railing, gathering a thin coat of frost that shimmered like glass. He often brushed it off, sat for a few minutes, and listened to the quiet world beyond the fence. One morning, as he sipped his coffee, Ace's truck pulled into the driveway. The young man stepped out, shoulders hunched against the cold, carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Morning, Dad," he called, voice brisk. "Morning," Thaddeus replied. "You're up early. Figured we could work before the storm hits." They went to the workshop together, the cold air nipping at their faces. Inside, the heater hummed faintly, filling the space with a low warmth. Asa unwrapped the bundle, a half-finished table leg, clearly shaped by his own uncertain hands. "I tried this at home," Asa said, scratching his neck. "Didn't turn out like I hoped." Thaddeus took it, turning it over in his hands. The edges were rough, uneven, but there was something honest about it. "You'll get there," he said. "You're already better than I was at your age." Asa grinned faintly. "You were probably perfect at my age." "Not even close," Thaddeus said. "I ruined more wood than I kept." They worked side by side for hours, the scrape of tools blending with the hum of the heater. Every few minutes Asa would ask a question, and Thaddeus would answer with the patience of a man who finally understood that teaching was more important than finishing. When the table leg was done, Asa looked at it proudly. "Not bad," he said. "Good enough to hold," Thaddeus replied. "And that's all that matters." Asa nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I never realized how much peace there is in this kind of work. No phone calls, no pressure, no noise." Thaddeus smiled. "That's why I stayed here all those years. The noise out there never built anything worth keeping." They paused for lunch, eating sandwiches on the workbench while the snow began to fall outside. Asa glanced toward his father. "Mom's talking about taking a teaching job again. Said it might be time she does something for herself." Thaddeus nodded. "That's good. She needs something that belongs only to her." "You're really all right with that?" Asa asked. "She gave most of her life to me and you too. She deserves a life that's hers now." Asa looked at him carefully. "You're not angry anymore, are you?" "No," Thaddeus said simply. "I'm free." The words hung in the quiet like smoke that refused to fade. That evening, the snow thickened into a storm. The house glowed like a lantern against the dark. Aloan had come over with the children, and Marilyn sat on the couch reading to them. The warmth of the fire softened her face, the years of worry lifting for once. Thaddeus watched her from his armchair. There was still love there, tempered, older, but unbroken. They had stopped pretending to be what they once were, and instead had learned to stand side by side without expectation. When the children went to bed, Marilyn approached him. "Aloan says Ace has been spending a lot of time in the workshop." "He's learning," Thaddeus said. She smiled. "You always wanted that." He nodded. "Better late than never." She hesitated, then sat beside him. "Do you ever think about leaving? Going somewhere warm? You've earned it." Thaddeus chuckled. "I did my traveling when I stayed still. There's more peace here than any island could give me." Marilyn looked into the fire. "I still don't know how to forgive myself for the way I left you in that hospital." He reached over, placing his weathered hand on hers. "You already did. You just haven't accepted it yet." Her eyes shimmered. "You're too kind." "I'm not kind," he said softly. "I'm tired of carrying anger. It takes more out of you than sickness ever could." They sat in silence, watching the flames shift and curl. The following week, Mrs. Keene visited to deliver the finalized trust papers. She stood in the kitchen with her familiar briefcase, her manner brisk but warm. "It's all done, Mr. Merritt," she said. Your grandchildren's accounts are secure, the deed transfer complete, and the foundation paperwork for the workshop's future has been filed. Thaddeus frowned. Foundation? Mrs. Keene smiled. The place you mentioned, to help older men regain their skills after injury. You named it Merritt's Hands. He blinked, surprised. I'd only mentioned the idea once. I know, she said, but you meant it. So I took the liberty of setting the motion. Marilyn, standing nearby, looked at him with pride. You never stop building, do you? Can't seem to, he said. Mrs. Keene gathered her papers. One last thing, Mr. Merritt. You wrote that letter for your children. Do you want it delivered now or held in trust? Thaddeus looked toward the stairs where Aloan's laughter mingled with her children's. Hold it. Let them read it long after I'm gone. Words have more meaning when silence has done its part. Mrs. Keene nodded. You always did understand timing. After she left, Thaddeus stepped outside to the porch again. The snow had stopped, leaving the world pristine and still. The rocking chair was buried halfway in white. He brushed it off, sat down, and looked at the dark sky above the trees. He thought about his father, the man who left him a single note that said, "You'll know what to do with the rest." He had carried those words for nearly half a century, never realizing their full truth until now. He didn't know what to do with the rest, not just with his property, but with his heart. Aloan came out quietly, a blanket around her shoulders. It's freezing, she said. Feels good, he replied. Reminds me I'm still here. She sat beside him, tucking the blanket to cover them both. You know, the kids said they want to learn how to build things too. Maybe you can teach them like you taught Asa. He smiled. I'd like that. She hesitated. Dad, yes. Do you ever think about what happens after? When you're gone, I mean. He exhaled slowly, his breath misting in the cold. All the time. But I don't worry about it. When the time comes, I hope I've left enough good behind to keep you all warm. Aloan leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the stars appear, one by one, across the dark. In the weeks that followed, life took on a steady rhythm again. The workshop became a place not just of wood and tools, but of stories. Neighbors began to stop by, retired men, widowers, a few veterans, curious about the new sign hanging by the door, Merritt's Hands, a place to build again. Thaddeus welcomed them with a smile, teaching them to carve, sand, and shape. The sound of laughter mixed with the scrape of tools, turning the small space into something alive. Marilyn sometimes brought hot soup for them. Aloan helped organize materials. Asa handled repairs and deliveries. What had once been one man's refuge became a shared creation, a quiet legacy reborn from pain. One late afternoon, after everyone had left, Thaddeus sat alone at the workbench. The sun slipped low through the frosted window, painting the sawdust gold. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. Him and Marilyn, newly married, standing in front of their first home. She was laughing, head tilted back, his arm around her waist. He smiled at it, his eyes glistening. He placed the photograph in a small wooden frame he'd carved earlier that week. On the back, he engraved a single line. We built more than we broke. When he set it on the shelf beside the rocking chair, the workshop seemed to hum with quiet life. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing through the bare trees like a whisper. And there, in the house that had once known bitterness, peace settled finally. Not the fragile kind that comes from pretending, but the kind that grows when truth has been faced, forgiveness accepted, and love allowed to take its gentler form. As the night deepened, Thaddeus Merritt sat in his chair, eyes closed, listening to the faint creak of wood that had outlasted everything except grace. The frost began to fade from the windows, and the first shy green buds appeared along Maple Grove Road. The town was stirring from winter's long silence, and so was Thaddeus Merritt's world. His workshop, once a quiet refuge, now pulsed with the slow, living rhythm of hammers and laughter. The small community of older men he had gathered came each morning, hands rough and eager, learning again what it meant to create. Thaddeus walked among them, steady now, his limp nearly gone. He corrected their grip, showed them the curve of the chisel, the patience of smoothing edges. Each sound in the room, every tap and scrape, felt like a heartbeat returning to its rightful pace. One morning, he stood by the open door, letting the scent of pine shavings mix with spring air. Across the yard, he saw Marilyn planting small flowers along the porch steps. She wore her old gardening gloves, her hair tied back, her face flushed from effort. It struck him how quietly time had softened them both. The anger that once filled their house had evaporated like frost in sunlight, replaced by something gentler, shared endurance. Asa arrived carrying 2 toolboxes and a mischievous grin. "Morning, old man," he called. Thaddeus smiled. "You're late." Asa set down the boxes. "Traffic. Also, coffee stopped me." "Good reasons both," Thaddeus said. "You ready to ruin another table?" "Probably," Asa replied. "But at least I'll ruin it better than last time." They laughed, and one of the men, Harlan, a retired mechanic, looked up from his bench. "You two sound like brothers." Thaddeus shook his head. "He's far too stubborn to be my brother." Asa's smile softened. "Takes one to know one." Their banter drew a few chuckles from the others. Clay, who now officially ran Merritt Construction, leaned on the doorway, watching the scene with quiet pride. "Looks like you've built something better than any house," he said. Thaddeus nodded. "A house can fall apart. This won't." When lunchtime came, they all gathered outside with sandwiches and coffee in paper cups. The talk was easy, full of old stories and gentle teasing. Thaddeus listened more than he spoke. Every face carried lines carved by time, mistakes, and endurance, and yet each of them glowed with purpose. It filled him with a satisfaction deeper than any profit his old business had ever brought. After the others left, Asa stayed behind to help sweep the floors. He glanced toward his father. "You ever think about retiring for real?" Thaddeus chuckled. "From what?" "From this. From always building, fixing, working." Thaddeus leaned on his broom. "If I stopped, I'd start dying again. That's what happens when men think stillness means peace." Asa nodded slowly. "Guess I understand that now." They swept in silence for a while until Asa asked, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently? That Mom hadn't left that day? That we'd been there?" Thaddeus paused. "I used to. But if it hadn't happened, I might never have changed the way I see life. I would have gone to my grave thinking loyalty was the same as love. And it's not." Asa asked. "No," Thaddeus said softly. "Love forgives. Loyalty just stays." Later that evening, Marilyn came into the workshop with a casserole dish wrapped in foil. "You'll forget to eat if I don't bring this," she said. He took it with a smile. "You're probably right." She looked around the workshop at the newly built tables, the stacks of carved wood, the faint smell of varnish in the air. "You've turned this place into something beautiful." "I just gave it purpose," he said. "The men did the rest." Her eyes softened. "You gave them back their pride. That's not small." He shrugged. "Maybe I was just fixing myself through them." Marilyn reached out and touched his arm, her voice almost a whisper. "You've done that too." For a long moment, they stood together, surrounded by the quiet hum of the workshop. Then she said, "Eloan wants to have everyone over for Easter dinner. She's planning it at her place this year." Thaddeus smiled faintly. "That'll be good. It's time the next generation takes over the table." She asked if you'd say grace. He looked surprised. "Grace? Me?" She said, "You've earned it." He laughed softly. "Tell her I'll think about it." When Easter arrived, the Merritt family gathered in Eloan's large, sunlit dining room. The smell of roasted ham and cinnamon rolls filled the air. The grandchildren ran circles around the table. Asa and his wife laughed at the noise, and Marilyn floated between the kitchen and dining room with the calm of someone who finally felt at home. Thaddeus sat at the head of the table, hands folded loosely. Eloan looked at him and nodded. "Would you, Dad?" He cleared his throat and looked around at the faces before him. "I'm not a preacher," he said, "and I'm not much for speeches anymore. But I do believe that gratitude isn't about what we have, it's about what we survived. Every one of us at this table has broken something, lost something, or hurt someone we love. And yet we're still here, still trying, still building. That's grace enough for me." The room fell quiet for a heartbeat, then filled with a warm murmur of agreement. Marilyn reached for his hand under the table and gave it a small squeeze. Dinner lasted long into the afternoon. They talked about school, work, travel plans, small joys. Thaddeus listened to it all, storing the sounds deep inside him like keepsakes. There was no longer any bitterness in his chest, only a strange, luminous calm. As the sun began to set, he stepped outside to the porch. The air smelled of grass and distant rain. The children's laughter echoed faintly from the yard. Marilyn joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. "You did well in there," she said. He smiled. Didn't stutter once. She looked at him for a long time. "You know, When you were in that hospital, I thought it was the end of us. But maybe it was just the start of something different. He nodded slowly. It was the day I started over. I just didn't know it yet. She placed her cup on the railing and leaned into him slightly. I still love you, you know, even if I forgot how to show it for a while. He turned to her, eyes soft. Then it's a good thing I never stopped. Weeks passed, and spring ripened into full bloom. The workshop grew busier. Clay handled most of the business work now. Asa taught newcomers, and Thaddeus spent his mornings tending the small garden Marilyn had planted. The flowers burst into color, lavender, marigold, and iris, spilling brightness into every dull corner of the yard. He often found himself sitting in the rocking chair at dusk, watching the world change around him. The chair creaked with each gentle motion, and the sound was a kind of prayer. One afternoon, a letter arrived, stamped and formal. Mrs. Keene's handwriting on the envelope. He opened it slowly, smiling as he read. Dear Mr. Merritt, I wanted to let you know that Merritt's Hands has been officially recognized as a community foundation. The local paper wishes to run a story about it. They'd like to feature your work and the story of how it came to be. I'll arrange the details if you agree. Yours sincerely, Margaret Keene. Thaddeus read it twice, then folded the paper neatly. A story, he thought. Once, his life had been a warning. Now, perhaps, it could be a lesson. That evening, he told Marilyn. She smiled. You should do it, she said. People could learn something from you. He chuckled. Maybe they'll just learn not to leave their old man in a hospital. She laughed, shaking her head. You'll never let that go completely. I've let it go, he said softly. I just don't want to forget what it taught me. A week later, the local paper published the article. The headline read, At 68, he had a stroke. Now, his hands build hope for others. Beneath it was a photograph of Thaddeus standing in his workshop, sawdust clinging to his sleeves, a faint smile on his face. People stopped him on the street to shake his hand. Strangers sent letters thanking him for reminding them that second chances were real. Even Asa's oldest son, now in college, called one evening to say, Grandpa, you're trending. Thaddeus only laughed. About time. But that night, when the house was quiet and the paper lay folded on the table, he felt something stir deep inside, a mixture of humility and wonder. For the first time in his life, he didn't measure his worth by what he owned or what he could give. He measured it by what remained when everything else had fallen away. He looked around the room. The photos, the rocking chair, the small crack in the wall that he never bothered to fix. Every imperfection spoke of endurance. When he stepped out onto the porch one last time that evening, the air was warm, and the wind carried the scent of earth waking up. He whispered into the stillness, You were right, Dad. I didn't know what to do with the rest. And as the sun dipped below the trees, Thaddeus Merritt sat in the chair he had built for love long lost and love returned, the wood creaking beneath him like the heartbeat of a life rebuilt, not in spite of loss, but because of it. Summer came slow that year, the kind of heat that shimmered across the pavements and made the air feel heavy with memory. The Merritt house, once a monument to silence, now breathed again. Wind chimes rang softly on the porch, laughter spilled from the yard, and the faint hum of saws drifted from the workshop every morning. Thaddeus Merritt had turned 70 that May. His hair was thinner, his walk slower, but there was still a quiet strength in the way he stood, shoulders square, eyes bright, voice steady. He spent his days teaching the men at Merritt's Hands and his evenings on the porch, the rocking chair swaying with the rhythm of forgiveness. The foundation had grown. What began as a handful of retired men now included volunteers, local carpentry students, and a few widows who wanted to learn simple repairs for their own homes. The once-forgotten workshop had become a small haven of purpose. One morning, Thaddeus stood before the group, wiping sawdust from his palms. Every plank has a grain, he said. You can't force it to bend where it doesn't want to. Same with people. You have to learn to work with the grain, not against it. The men listened, nodding. His words had weight, not because of authority, but because they came from a man who had lived enough to know how fragile strength could be. After the session, Clay approached him. The mayor's office called, he said. They want to give you a community service award next month. Thaddeus chuckled. They must be running out of heroes. Clay grinned. You earned it, Tad. He looked around the workshop, his gaze lingering on each workbench, each face. If they give it to me, he said, it belongs to everyone who walked through that door. Every man here built something more important than a table. That night, When the others had gone home, he stayed behind. The light from the single hanging bulb spread across the tools like liquid gold. He picked up his father's old hammer, the same one he'd used for nearly 50 years, and set it on the bench. The handle was smooth from use, the metal head dulled but strong. He thought of the day his father handed it to him, saying only, "Make it build something that lasts." He smiled to himself. "I think I did," he whispered. Weeks passed, and summer deepened. Aloan often visited with the children, who loved to chase fireflies in the yard while Asa helped varnish furniture in the workshop. Marilyn, her teaching job settled and thriving, came home later in the evenings, humming softly as she cooked. The Merritts had stopped trying to return to what they were. Instead, they had learned to live in what remained. On a quiet Sunday, Marilyn joined Thaddeus on the porch after dinner. The sunset burned red across the sky, the air heavy with the smell of jasmine and cut grass. "You know," she said, "it's strange. We're happier now than we were in our best years." Thaddeus smiled. "Maybe happiness comes easier when you stop trying to earn it." She looked at him, her eyes full of something both tender and weary. "You've changed more than anyone I know. I used to think the stroke broke you. But it didn't. It stripped you down to who you really were." He took a long breath, the air thick with summer heat. "It broke everything that didn't matter," he said. They sat together in silence, the rocking chair creaking beneath them, fireflies blinking in the dark. The award ceremony came a week later. The community center was filled with familiar faces, neighbors, friends, the men from the workshop. Asa and Aloan sat in the front row, the grandchildren restless beside them. Marilyn stood near the stage, her hands clasped. When Thaddeus's name was called, the crowd applauded warmly. He walked to the podium slowly, his cane tapping softly against the wood floor. The mayor handed him a plaque and stepped aside. Thaddeus looked at the audience, his voice calm but sure. "I used to think legacy was something you could leave in a will," he began. "A business, a house, a bit of money. But I learned that those things don't last. They get sold, divided, forgotten. The only thing that lasts is what you build into people. The care you teach. The forgiveness you learn to give. The work you do with your hands and heart." He paused, looking at his family. "I had to lose everything to understand that. I had to be left behind to see who I really was. And I'm grateful for it, every part of it." The room fell quiet. Then, as he stepped down, the applause came again, louder, deeper, carrying a kind of reverence that felt less like celebration and more like acknowledgement. Afterward, as people came to shake his hand, Aloan hugged him tightly. "You're something else, Dad," she whispered. He smiled. Just a man who finally paid attention. That night, the house was still. Marilyn had gone to bed early, the children's laughter long faded. Thaddeus sat in his chair on the porch, the award resting on the table beside him. The stars spread across the sky like dust scattered by the hand of God. He closed his eyes and listened to the faint creak of the rocking chair. It reminded him of the hospital monitor all those months ago, the slow, steady rhythm that had promised another chance. He realized that life had never given him more time. It had simply given him a clearer reason to use what remained. His breath came slow, easy. The air smelled of lilac and sawdust. A light breeze stirred the chimes. When Marilyn woke in the early hours, she found him there, still, peaceful, one hand resting on the arm of the chair, the other holding his father's hammer. His face wore the faintest smile, as if he had fallen asleep mid-thought. The dawn came quiet and golden, spilling across the porch and into the workshop where his tools waited, lined in perfect order. The first rays caught the words he had carved above the doorway weeks earlier. "What you build with your hands fades. What you build with your heart endures." Aloan arrived not long after, drawn by a stillness she could feel before she even entered. She touched her father's shoulder and whispered through tears, "You built something that lasts, Dad." Asa stood beside her, his jaw tight, his eyes wet. He looked toward the open workshop and said softly, "Then we'll keep building." Later that day, when the neighbors gathered, Marilyn placed a small note on the porch table beside the plaque and the hammer. It was in Thaddeus's handwriting, brief and sure. "Don't grieve. Keep the doors open. Let the sound of work be my prayer." Years passed. The workshop never closed. The sign out front aged but never fell. The rocking chair remained on the porch, repaired many times but never replaced. Children grew into adults, adults into mentors. And on quiet evenings, When the wind swept through the trees on Maple Grove Road, the faint creak of wood could still be heard, steady, patient, eternal. It sounded, to those who listened closely, like the heartbeat of a man who had learned, at last, that love, once built right, never truly dies. If this story moved you, don't scroll just yet. Some people build fortunes. Others build forgiveness. Thaddeus Merritt built both, and left behind a truth we often forget. You're never too old to start over, never too broken to rebuild, and never too late to be remembered for the way you love. If you believe second chances are real, share this story so someone else remembers that life doesn't end when people leave. It begins when you decide to live differently. Subscribe for more stories that heal, break, and rebuild the heart. Because sometimes, the quietest revenge is living with peace.